Hi everybody. We're going to finish or continue Huck Finn. We're going to pick up where I left off on Friday. Hopefully you remember what's going on because I don't, but it's been a few days ago. Quick, Jim. There isn't any time for fooling around and pretending to sleep. There's a gang of murderers on this wreck, and if we don't find their boat and set it drifting down the river, they'll get away. Quick, hurry. Let's start looking. You start at the raft, and... Oh my lord, whispered Jim, looking over the rail. There isn't any raft. It broke loose and it's gone. I caught my breath and almost fainted. We were trapped on a wreck with two murderers. With our raft gone, we just had to find their boat and take it for ourselves. So we started our search. After a few minutes, Jim spotted the boat tied up to the stern of the wreck. It was piled high with loot the robbers had taken from the steamboat. I was pretty thankful that he was able to find it in the pitch dark. In half a second, I was in the boat, and Jim came tumbling after me. I cut the rope that held us to the wreck, and away we went. When we were 300 or 400 yards downstream, we saw Packer's lantern appear on deck, shining like a little spark. They must have discovered that their boat was gone and realized that they were in as much trouble as their prisoners. Jim manned the oars, and we began to hunt for our raft. For the first time, I began to worry about the men and how dreadful it was, even for murderers, to be in such a fix. So I said to Jim, the first light we see, we'll land and find a good hiding place for you and your raft. Then I think of some kind of story I can get someone to go and rescue the gang. That way, they can be hanged when their time comes. But that idea was a failure because it soon began to storm again. The rain poured down so heavily, and we couldn't see any lights at all. The wind pushed us along down the river while we watched for lights and looked for our raft. After a long while, the rain let up, but the clouds stayed. The lightning showed us a black thing ahead. It was the raft. We made straight for it. When we pulled alongside the raft, we began unloading some of the loot from the boat and piling it in a great heap on our little raft. There were boots, blankets, and all sorts of clothing. Jim even found a box of cigars. We hadn't been this rich in all of our lives. After we unloaded all the loot, I told Jim to float along down the river and shine a light when he figured he'd gone about 2 miles. Then he was to keep the light burning until I came. Meanwhile, I would be manning the oars of the boat and heading towards shore. When I reached the bank, I tied up the boat and headed for the small village I saw twinkling in the darkness. The first person I met was a watchman. As soon as I saw him, I began crying. I made up a story about how the steamboat had crashed and how my family was stranded there. Since I was the only one who could swim, I told him, they had sent me to save them. I promised the watchman that my family would reward him well for saving their lives. After I'd finished my story, the old man got his boat ready for the rescue mission. I crept away in the darkness and waited in the boat on shore for Jim's signal. But I couldn't rest easy until I saw the watchman's boat heading for the wreck. I was feeling kind of proud of myself for taking so much trouble for that gang. Well, before long, I could see the wreck, dim and dusky, sliding along down into the river. A cold shiver went through me. There wasn't much chance now that anybody could survive. It seemed a long time before Jim's light showed up. When I finally saw it, I rowed towards it. By the time I got there, the sky was beginning to get a little gray in the east. We tied the boat to the raft and struck out for an island in the river. When we reached it, we hid the raft behind some bushes and sank the boat. When this was done, we turned in and slept like two dead people. All right. Chapter 7. Huck Finn. After our adventure with the gang, Jim and I decided to take it easy for a while and spend a few days in the woods. I told him what happened inside the wreck and on shore. He said that when he discovered the raft was gone, he nearly died. He figured it was all over for him anyway. If no one saved him, he would be sure to drown. And if someone had found him, they would take him back to the village and get the reward. Then Miss Watson would sell him down south for sure. I knew he was right about all that, and we both realized how lucky we'd been. After a few days in the woods, we got back on the raft and headed down the river once again. Sometimes we'd have the whole river to ourselves for the longest time. It's lovely to live on a raft. We had the sky up there, all speckled with stars, and we would lay on our backs, looking up at them and discussing whether they were made or only just happened. Jim was sure the stars were made, but I said I thought they just happened. Once or twice during the night, we would see a steamboat slipping along in the dark. Now and then it would belch a whole world of sparks out of its chimneys, and the sparks would rain down on the river. Then the boat would turn a bend, and its lights would wink out. A long time after the steamboat was gone, the waves would get to us and joggle the raft a bit. Then there'd be nothing but silence. One morning after daybreak, I found a canoe drifting near the main shore. I got into it and paddled over to the shore to look for berries. After I landed, I was following a cow path across a creek when I saw a couple of men running towards me. I was about to run in the other direction, but they called out to me. "Save us, please save us," they cried. "We haven't done anything wrong, or are being chased by men and dogs." I felt sorry for them, so I led them back to the canoe. We climbed aboard, and as I rowed, I studied the two men. One of them was about 70 years old. He had a bald head and very gray whiskers. The other fellow was about 30 and pretty ordinary looking. Both men's clothes were all wrinkled, but fancy looking, and they carried big fat carpet bags. I rowed them out to the raft, where we all had breakfast, then relaxed and talked. The first thing that came out was that these two fellows didn't know each other, but both had gotten into trouble. The bald-headed man had been selling medicine that was supposed to take the tartar off people's teeth. The trouble was that it took off the enamel along with it as well. The younger man had been running temperance meetings, when he lectured folks about the evils of drinking. He's right about that. The people loved him, and he'd been making up to $10 a night. Then he got caught drinking himself, and he had to run for his life. Well, the two men got to talking, and they decided that they should team up in a business and travel up and down the river together. They began making all sorts of plans. Suddenly, in the middle of their conversation, the younger man began to weep. "My poor heart is broken," he cried, "for I have fallen so low from such a high position in life." Then he cleared his throat. wiped the corner of his eye with a rag, and said, "Gentlemen, I reveal a great secret to you. By rights, I am a duke. My great-grandfather, the eldest son of the Duke of Bridgewater, came to this country at the end of the last century. His younger brother stayed in England and seized the duke's title and estate upon the nobleman's death, even though they should have passed on to my grandfather, my father, and then me. So you see, I am the rightful Duke of Bridgewater. Yet here I am, forlorn, torn from my high estate, despised by the cold world, ragged, worn, heartbroken, and living on a raft." Jim pitied him ever so much, and so did I. We tried to comfort him, but it wasn't much use. All he asked was that we bow to him, wait on him, and call him your grace, or my lord. Then he added the plain Bridgewater would be okay too. Well, that was easy, so we did it. All through dinner, we stood around and waited on him. After a while, the other man, the old bald-headed one, got pretty quiet. He didn't seem to like all the special treatment that the Duke was getting. "Looky here, Bridgewater," he said. "I'm sorry for you, but you aren't the only person here with troubles. You see, I too have a secret. I'm a king. I am Louis the 17th, son of Louis the 16th and Mary Antoinette of France." "You, at your age?" cried the Duke. "That's impossible. You must be the late Charleston, for you look at least 600 or 700 years old." "Trouble has done it, Bridgewater. Trouble has brought these gray hairs and this premature baldness," cried the old man. Well, he cried and carried on, so that Jim hardly knew what to do. We felt for him, but we felt proud too. It isn't every day that ordinary people get to meet royalty. Then the king asked that we treat him special too. He wanted to be called Your Majesty, and he wanted to be waited on at meals. So Jim and I started treating him special too. All this got the Duke pretty upset. He wanted to be the only special one, but now he had to share everything with the king. Still, the king acted real friendly towards him and said that all dukes of Bridgewater were thought a good deal of by his father, Louis the 16th. The Duke stayed huffy for a good while. "Like it or not, we've got to be together on this raft for a long time. What's the use of you being so sour? We've got a good thing going here. Plenty of food, an easy life. Let's shake hands and be friends." The Duke agreed and shook his hand, and Jim and I were pretty glad to see it. It would have been uncomfortable to have any bad feelings on a raft. The most important thing is for everybody to be friendly and feel kind and right towards each other. It didn't take me long to make up my mind that these men weren't kings or dukes at all. They were just low-down, lying frauds. But I decided it'd be best not to say a word about it. That way there'd be no quarrels and no one would get into any trouble. If they wanted us to call them kings and dukes, I had no objections. As long as it kept peace in the family, I didn't mind. There was no sense in telling Jim either. He was so excited about knowing royalty and all. It would only make him feel badly if he knew these two were fakes. About the only thing I ever learned from Pap was to let certain kinds of people have their way. Okay, that's it for today. We'll start up with chapter 8 later. Stay tuned.